You're meant to show up and lead, but it's not a performance. So people wrestle with their identity, a performance of what they think a leader is. Pretty alarming question to get starting at the age of about 5 every day. Every day was just, what are you? Are you willing to be curious about a different leadership approach? There's a lot of invisibility and silence happening around you at all times. What do I want to be true for my ideal self moving forward? But really, how I made people feel.
Today, guys, I have a podcast with Ingrid Hu Dahl. She's the author of Sun Shining on the Morning Snow and a leadership coaching rock star. Her book, that's what I just mentioned, we're going to talk about that today. It's a raw story of crushing racism, fearless resilience through loss, and Taipei's chaos to empowering leaders. So I believe Ingrid's journey is a viral and it's a spark of courage that I think as leaders, all of us need. So I kind of want to go into your story, Ingrid, and thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Jason. It's such an honor.
I want to get a little bit into, because it's like a memoir, and I encourage everybody, we'll have it in the show notes below, and the link to make sure that everybody gets the book, because there's an identity and a heritage crisis, I think, especially here in the United States, and we've always kind of had it, but because of racism, it's kind of been, it's that lid that's been stamped down over and over again. And I know, your journey is mixed race, and I think it's a Hawaiian word, right? Hapa?
Yeah, Hapa. Respectfully from Hapa Hole.
Yeah, this navigating the white suburbs in New Jersey, and then, your mom being from Taipei. How did these contrasting experiences shape your understanding of your Scandinavian heritage and then your Taiwanese? And what did that mean embracing Hapa?
I say in the book, no one really brought that up. They weren't using that term. They weren't calling me Huenshuer, which means mixed blood child, which is in the book as well. But it was ever present in how I interacted, predominantly with white adults. So there's like how you interact with young people and kids your age, and then how adults interact with you. And what I think is just so alarming is growing up and just not even recognizing difference, just loving my
Right.
family for who they are and their uniqueness, and loving the Scandinavian and American side, the integration of that with my mother's beautiful cultural heritage. But then just being always reckoning with you don't belong, you're other on forums, and the way people would address, like, what are you? Which is a pretty alarming question to get starting at the age of about 5 every day from strangers.
Wow. Every day?
Every day, multiple
Was it
times
just
a
New
day.
Jersey, or do you think this was?
It's interesting. In Taipei, growing up, also part-time, so to speak, I wasn't asked that, but it was always like assumed, like, you're half Western, right? Like, you're
Right, right,
mixed
right, right.
with, like, American, is it? That was kind of the assumption, like, oh, you look so Western, you must be mixed. But in America, it wasn't, oh, you look so unique. So curious, what is your ethnic background? You don't seem necessarily all white. Like, what's up? It was just, what are you? And where are your people from? And I'd be like, well, I live in the neighborhood. From New Jersey. No, 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 no. Where are your people from? And so it's just like not direct,
People.
but yeah, yeah.
Do you feel like, because I know with your parents' interracial love story, and you wrote that in the book real beautifully, and it's kind of an act of bravery, especially back then, because when did they get married? Was it in the 70s?
79.
80s?
I came in
What?
1980. They married in 79, and they were very young. So they were in their early 20s. Yep.
Yeah, and they kind of like fell in love. Was it over a poem
Yes,
at
it was one
Rutgers?
of those double dates gone wrong. Yeah, at
Mm.
Rutgers University, mom's a grad student, dad's an undergrad. They're in these opposite dates, and
Right.
he sees this poem, which is actually an image of her exact poem from that time, is in the book. And he sees it and he wants to know, what famous poet wrote this? She was like, well, I actually did the calligraphy. And he just like was smitten right away.
How do you think that their resilience, especially, in their relationship in the early 80s, how do you think it would like influence your view? And not just on love and relationships, but like cultural barriers with you coaching leadership?
Yeah, of course. I think it's really amazing to have such a stark difference because my parents were always on a spotlight. They were very naive, like they were just in love. And they were just so excited once it was like approved, like, yes, we are, saying okay that you can get married, mostly from my mom's side. They were just so elated that they just were like, let's get married. Woo, we're in love. And that naive sense of like, wait, we're gonna have a lot of spotlight and everybody's looking at us and kind of don't want us to work out. It's 1980 when I came into the picture, and it was only 13 years before where interracial marriage was legalized in the United States. So in 1980, also, the US Census had 3% of couples actually marked as interracial, like in a marriage situation. So there's a lot of spotlight on them, and people would always kind of question them in these ways that were like, oh, she must be a gold digger. She's looking for a green card. My dad must like Asian servitude inclined women. And they sort of somehow ignored a lot of that. Like they were just young and just like, oh, well. And I love that sense of boldness because it didn't stick around for them, but I inherited it. And for me, it was very important for me to say, hey, I am who I am. Once I was ready to come out, I was like, hey, I'm a lesbian, I'm out. And even in the face of my family, not supporting that, kind of hiding, wanting to fit in or not rustle the feathers of the onlooker, where I was like, absolutely not. Like, that's not a negotiable. So they kind of taught me that, but then they sort of went like the opposite and trying to assimilate and not get that spotlight. They were tired
Right.
of that spotlight. So in
No, that
leadership,
makes sense. Right. Yeah. Go ahead with
yeah.
leadership.
Well, in leadership, you think about people who've had many different experiences growing up that shape them, and ancestral, familial, how people like it's really important to know how that shows up in who you are authentically as a leader. And I find that as a leader, you are kind of innately have a spotlight. Like you are meant to show up and lead, but it's not a performance. And so people wrestle with their identity, a performance of what they think a leader is, how they've been taught a leader is. And if you haven't done the work of your own self awareness and curiosity around how have these things impacted me and how do they connect with the kaleidoscope of different experiences of my team, we haven't even given ourselves the foundation to set ourselves up well for being a good leader.
No, that
So
makes
that's
sense.
important work.
That makes sense, and I think even as leadership, we became so blind in the tech world that, that I'm in, and you see this a lot with your coaching. It's all Stanford, Ivy League, white, young guys with Patagonia vests on and Dockers. I mean, that's all it is. It's like the whole room's full of that, and then there may be like your, like they put it like stereotypical, like you'll have a chief happy officer, that may be, a woman. But it's even in the tech world, which is supposed to be, our next, big booms in AI and all this, you see it not being very interracial, especially at work. What do you tell leaders? Like, I mean, we'll get back to your book, but I feel like this is really important. What do you tell leaders when they're looking at hiring somebody, or how do you handle, you know, leaders may be having like a tent or a hinge, I think a lot of us do, until we have to do the deep work to see that hint of racism, that's in all of us.
That's a really good question. And having worked in some big tech companies and having the positionality of trying to help coach, support people who are leaders of color and also leaders who are white, essentially. Like,
Right.
I think a lot of it is, are you willing to be curious
Mm,
about a different leadership approach, a definition of what a leader even looks like, speaks like, how they approach ideas? Like sometimes it's about communication styles.
yes.
Okay, well, some people like to communicate from a systematic approach. Others are very spirited. Some are very considerate, and others are very direct. And even just in that, if you look at that as like a diverse way of in which we communicate, knowing what your style is, especially when you're unhinged. Like when I'm unhinged, that direct comes out fierce. And people are like, damn, whoa, I'm scared. Like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. And you're like, no, 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 no. It's just that's how I am communicating right now because I'm unhinged or I'm stressed, which is happening
Right.
all over the place, right? In those moments, it's so important to know as a leader, okay, if I've got multiple people and all these different ways of, how do I communicate as a direct in a way that meets somebody who's considerate, spirited, and systematic in a way where they all feel like their communication style is just as important as mine, that it's just as heard. And I'm doing the work to be curious enough and to lean in enough to instead of starting questions with tell me, being really curious and meaning it and listening, just be like, what about that is inspiring you right now? Tell me more about that approach is different than a tell me, you know what I'm saying? There's a
Right.
difference.
Yes.
And for a spirited to kind of get their idea across, but kind of calm down, so to speak, so systematic can really hear what is the problem we're trying to solve and what's the data that backs it up. Like all those are really important. So
100%.
just in that, let alone supporting and coaching leaders through their assumptions. Like, there's too many
Right.
assumptions and perceptions going on. We make shortcuts because we're short on time, right? And it's like, no, 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 no. The act of a true inclusive leader, you have to slow down. You have to listen to understand and actually care about what somebody's saying and be curious about it.
Right.
And you want to ask exploratory questions that challenge your assumptions also. Like, so you're not leading from a place of assuming, and then you're giving a lot of space for growth mindset and there being some bias or that you are wrong. So what can I learn from this conversation? What do I want to change? So if I'm going into a conversation just assuming, oh, I'm in this room with an Asian woman, I'm just going to assume she's going to be quiet. I'm going to assume that she
Right.
won't really speak up. Then I'm probably just going to ignore her.
Hmm.
But it's like if I can check my bias and be like, okay, I've noticed that there's a pattern where I come in, I'm very direct, I kind of take up all the airtime, and I'm curious about that. I'm actually going to ask, hey, I'm curious, in your experience, do you find that I take up a lot of airtime? Like, tell me about what your reality is. And she, if she feels safe, she or he might say, oh, yes, you do. And I really actually have so many ideas I want to share, but I don't know how to get them out. Fictitiously, let's assume that that's happening, right? And then you as a leader can be like, how can I create a space where I'm hearing the amazing ideas that I desperately do want to hear? And they're like, okay, well, how about we have meetings where I share my idea first and so does the rest of the people on the team and we hear yours last. So allowing people to help problem solve for you to kind of interrupt your, I guess, rut in behavior. Because
Hmm.
I grew up learning horses and if you'll let me just share this quick thing, like
No, I love it.
horses, okay? When you ride horses and you're really good at them, right? You're like training and doing all this stuff. A horse who's really well trained might know that, okay, you're going to try to get them out of like the rut. There literally is a rut that people have to like go in and scrape through because it's like, oh God, it's digging and digging. And a horse that's like, let's just put this horse like well trained, open, like receptive to the slight movements of the rider, they're not looking to go in the rut. But a horse who's tired, who's like not super aligned with the rider, they're kind of like, oh, I have to do this again, daily grind. They're the ones who really drive the rut and resist any change and being pulled into the experience and unknown of what the ring is showing you across all these different scary jumps and things. So I love growing up with horses to train me how to be a good and avoid that rut at all costs. That is like the rut of death as a leader.
Yeah, that's so good, and I appreciate you sharing that. The thing that I got from that, and one of the things I think that leaders need to understand, especially, is you don't know that person's story unless unless you've had beers with them or some wine or something when they open up to you. So you being like me, I came out of the Marine Corps, so I had to kind of tamp it down a little bit. Like you can't be like, "Hey, kids, we're gonna do it." Like it doesn't work that way. So and then every other word being a swear word, that offends some people. So, you have to be very, you have to be, and I think that's something that is just being cognizant of what asking, I think is really important. Like you said, creating a safe space and then asking. But I think people are they're afraid to ask because they don't want to kind of, F up the question or seem like they're coming out, like you said earlier, like, well, you people, like it could come out so wrong. Do you have like insight on that? We're gonna get back to you as a child because I want to get back to the book. But I love this. This is really cool. Like, what's offensive to you? I mean, you shared earlier that you're a lesbian. Like if a leader came to you, how would you want them to ask you, to open up for your ideas and stuff, like you were saying earlier?
Yeah, and it was certainly from like my queer sexuality. Definitely don't think it's appropriate for anybody to ask me, like, Ingrid, from your perspective as a queer person, it's sort of like, okay, well, from your perspective as a cis white male,
Right.
I think I already know it, but
Right.
um, I think it's really important just to remember that if you're in a position of power by role or identity, right, affiliation, you can assume that there's a lot of invisibility and silence happening around you at all times.
Yes. 100%.
And so for you to not step into the awkwardness of, oh, I might say this wrong or it might be offensive, I think it's just like worth ask the real question. What is the real question? What's the real thing you want to say? I find that sometimes the most blunt things that I've been complimented on is like, oh, Ingrid, you're so exotic in the workplace by white male, and it's in the book. And I'm kind of like, wait, what are you actually trying to say? And also, that can be hurtful. Would you like to know why? I'd be willing to share with you because I care about you. That's a moment to connect, kind of what you're saying over beers or wine. But even at the workplace where somebody's like, yeah, actually, could you tell me why that's hurtful? And you share that if you're willing, and people are like, wow, I had no idea that word was so damaging. And I don't want to ever use that word again to you because I get it now. To people being like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Well, comfortably, I guess I meant that I was giving you a compliment, you look pretty today and different. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I know that as a peer of yours, you love my leadership and working with me. So is there a different kind of compliment you want to share? They're like, yeah, actually, I really love how you boldly say things in the room that no one else does. And I appreciate that about you as a leader. I'm like, okay, that is a compliment I love and resonates with me. So it's almost just like people kind of doing a little bit of equation breaking down, like what works for people and actually what am I trying to say? And maybe the thing I'm trying to say isn't actually fruitful or productive to the team experience or to this person's relationship with me. So what does work is actually something that is much more to our collective gain.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. For me, it was just learning you don't have to be sarcastic or funny on everything. You can have, if you have true intention, like you said, if you can really get personal with and stay positive, in the sense of, like you said, not personal in the sense of like you said with the exotic or whatever, but having the ability, because I feel like I've had to relearn.
Hmm.
I think a lot of leaders, if they want to take this seriously, especially if you're doing coaching, having 120 employees, I'm constantly having communication with people and having to learn communication the right way. I mean, the way it's always should have been,
You're right.
not that 80-year-old white male barking orders, with the suit on.
So much unlearning. And that goes for everybody, right? Like, as somebody who's a person of color who's queer, I'm unlearning stuff all the time. Like, apparently, you can't say certain things, it's offensive. And you're like, really? Well, back in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, that was the norm. It's not anymore. It's just
Right.
changing all the time. And I appreciate that you bringing that up. That I feel like a lot of the work I do as an executive coach is helping people have the awareness of opportunities to shift out of that rut or that habit and try something new that feels a little bit scary. So it might feel scary to show up in a way where you're a bit more authentic or you say, I don't know. Honestly, Simon Sinek talks about that. Like, I don't know. I made a mistake and I need help. And most leaders who are struggling with this, like not wanting to unlearn or my comfort zone is like skin tight and I don't want to like burst out of it. That's really hard to say. And
Yes.
so when I work with some CEOs, they're like, no, I don't want to show up as dot, 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 dot. And you're like, but is that mean your ego and the fear of being seen like that driving your bus? Like, where are you? And that can't be the goal. The goal, if you're a leader, is absolutely to be a conduit. It's not about you. Yes, you have a certain role, but it's not, it's about your talent and the environment and motivating people to be innovative and curious and want to work together in a way that's going to accelerate a business. Like truly, like that's your job. But if it's all about you and your fear and trying to make sure people don't see that you're scared, and you don't show up like curious or authentically, or say what you need. Like I've coached people who are like, I just want once for somebody to tell me that I'm doing a good job. And I'd really love somebody to give me a hug and tell me that I'm committed. That is absolutely doable. But if you don't know that that's what you need and are embarrassed by that need, you don't get the need. And it comes out in these ways that are most often not healthy for you or the people.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The most important things in our life, we never study or read manuals on or
It's true.
Like owning a pet. We don't read about that. We just, oh, here's a cute dog or a cute
Yeah,
cat.
and you're like,
Or like having kids. That's like the worst. Like, I was like, you should be having like 50 manuals, like 4 years of college before you have a kid, because you're gonna
that's
fuck them all
hilarious.
up,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, yeah. I think what did our parents have, like Dr. Spock or something? Was that it?
Yeah, yeah, which was, basically my parents were like, "Hey, go outside, go play," which the kids don't do that nowadays.
Physics.
Yes, exactly, that's how I'm glad I was raised that way, not on the
Latchkey. Yeah.
phone all the time. But, I wanna get into the bus stop,
Yeah.
speaking
It's
of
good.
kids, and then, someone called you a half piece of shit.
Mhm.
And this is that cultural landscape, and obviously that's anger and, they were taught that, probably from, their father or something of that nature or, wherever they taught that for. I would imagine it was a boy, that was a bully.
It was.
What did that happen, with your sense of belonging? And how do you reconcile those feelings today? Like, have you dealt with that in a deeply way?
Yeah, you mean as an adult as well?
Yes. Yeah. Cause these things like drag on, for decades.
I mean, I've done a lot of good work around the healing of that and making sense of xenophobia and how it's learned. And, I really started seeing how, whatever you want to call it, systems of oppression, right?
Mhm.
Those dynamics of power are learned so fast.
Mhm.
Right? And in the moment that you feel you have a little bit of power, there's very little manual to your point on how to wield it differently. So
Mhm.
oftentimes it's just being recycled and it's like a little bit of a bullying, a little bit of a gang up. Like it's the same mixtape
Mm.
going on over and over, right? And that doesn't matter. Like that's for every racial, ethnic group of like every group is learning that through
Mhm.
systems of oppression. And I think interrupting that xenophobia and slowing it down and being curious about it and feeling the feeling of like, wow, that feels kind of scary. At like the age of 5, I've done a lot of work to get to a point where you breathe through it and you're like, okay, wow, I'm still dealing with sexism and the bamboo ceiling. And there's all these other elements that I still grapple with as a woman. I still get told things like not that long ago, I was told, wow, you were really pushy in getting your opinion across. And it's like, if I were a man, and I say this right then and there, if I were a man, would you say the same thing? No, really, tell me, like, think about it. And they're like, well, I'm like, and the reason why is because I've seen somebody else in a different scenario push you and challenge you, and you love the healthy debate. So tell me what's different about me providing healthy debate and challenging you. That's my job. And they were like, well, I guess yeah, okay. But it was pushy. And I was like, because why? And they're like, well, you wouldn't just do what I said. I'm like, is that what you think that's my job is? Is just to do what you say as a leader? Should I just be doing what you say? So it's just fascinating, like having those dialogues without the pain of it, but knowing it's happening and it's real.
Yeah, and I think,
Happening and it's real.
yeah, Ingrid, I think on both sides, politics is horrific on this, on left and right. With this, is that everybody walks around with a label maker, so and so if they could, if I could do right now, put like 5 labels on you, and then say you're pushy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I
you're
could
right.
be like, this label, this label, this label, this
Yeah,
label, this label. Oh, you're pushy, and that's what people do. They have this filter instead of just looking at it as a human.
we are. Uh-huh, uh-huh. It's just neuroscience though, right? Yeah, I think we have to. Like, you can't be silent anymore, and invisibility is not negotiable. So, no, you have to be visible and heard. That's part of like the work that I need to do to also create space. Like, I would think designing environments now as a leader is to make sure that no one has to explain their worth to belong.
Yes, that's good.
Like, they shouldn't have to explain their
Yes.
worth to belong. You belong, period, right? Even if you've always felt like an outsider like me, in this environment where we're working together, we all belong. We're all different and it's cool. But for sure, what you're seeing is like the neuroscience of bias. Like, we're all biased. We all make the mental shortcuts, right?
Yeah.
But where it gets not okay is if we don't slow down and say, I made this mental shortcut that is actually biased.
Mhm.
Or, gosh, I have so much expediency bias that I'm not even slowing down to ask that person, how are they?
Uh-huh.
Or I have such similarity bias, like all the people on my team are the same affinity as me, the same communication style and working style as me. Are we even getting really good, innovative ideas we haven't even healthy debated because it's the same thing, same idea, same approach. So we have to really check that innate human bias to like make a leap. Like finish somebody's sentence is a really good similar example to that, where, how many of you have tried finishing somebody's sentence? Like that's a really good signal that, whoa, my brain is just firing up on all those synapses to make those connections and shortcuts for me. I need to take a breath and really listen because I'm missing out. I need to hear what people are saying to understand it, not what I think they're saying or what I want to respond with, to really connect with people and even yourself.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's what the half piece of shit comment, did it translate? Because this is a I
Yeah.
had the kind of the same thing bullied, and it translated into, "I'm never good enough." And so then that was good because it made me work really hard, but in relationships, it sucked. And I talked to a lot of leaders who have this "I'm not good enough" behind the scenes.
Hmm.
Have you ever seen that or heard that, or have you gotten, like, in your coaching deep enough with a leader where they kind of are vulnerable with that?
Absolutely. But back to, I suppose, like how I was experiencing that, I just was so thrown by those comments. And the fascinating part is the comment just wasn't a white boy at this predominantly white neighborhood bus stop. It was also from an Asian brother in a Asian church on a Sunday.
Wow.
It came from a bullying girl with little means at the horse barn that I worked at. Like the bullying was showing up. And that's kind of what I was talking about with systems of oppression. It's just sort of like everybody's learning it. But when leaders really sit down, I think, and do the work of what were the messages that I ingested that are actually not mine, but tried to help me in some way, that I can
Mhm.
say, hey, you tried to serve this purpose and I thank you for that. And I don't need you anymore in this way. I'm good. That kind
Mm.
of mental exercise helps, I find, leaders stay the path to live boldly and truthfully and not stuck in that rut. That mental chatter, those lies, that mixtape of I'm only half a person, I don't belong, people don't like me, like as the starting point. I'm not
Mhm.
liked. And I now need to
Mhm.
be liked and please people. And my whole life, right, is trying to please people and perform. Whoa, you gotta get to a place where you're like, why did that affect me so much? And does it affect me now? What is true now? And
Mhm.
what do I want to be true for my ideal self moving forward? And how do I start like planning that out? And a coach is really good to help with like clarifying that, creating the goals, what's the actual things that I can achieve within like tomorrow, this week's time, which is such a beautiful part of like coaching. And I know you're a coach. So, hey.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, and I wanna piggyback on that. Being bold, you said that's a hard word. When I talk to leaders, they don't know how to be bold or what bold means, especially now. So it's kind of like, well, I'll just stay in my office. If there's a problem, I'll get with HR and I'll handle it. I was talking to a leader, it was really funny, and he's like, I don't know how to handle this lady. She was a C-suite person, and he goes, "She's a lesbian." He, like, whispered it to me, and I was like, "And? Like, what does her sex department have to do with anything?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, have you met her?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, we just kinda talk a little bit." And I was like, "Well, I've been here for 4 hours, and I talked to her for, like, 20 minutes, and she makes beer. And I know you said you love beer and like beer. Have you
The
guys had a
connection.
conversation about beer?" And then 2 weeks later, he's like, "Bro, she's, like, my best employee now. She's, like, working really hard, and, like, we went out and had beers and went to these different breweries, and we're always
Yeah.
sending, like, pictures of labels and stuff." And, it's like, how do you have connection and a sense of belonging and being bold? So I think that's a key word there that leaders don't know. And then we're gonna get it speaking of bold, we're gonna get to your grandma.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, she was so bold.
Uh-huh.
I find that boldness has a lot to do with heart. So, reconnecting with yourself, having heart for others and curiosity and care and wanting to connect and relate with others sets you up to live boldly. Because you think about the tough conversations that you have that similar to that kind of second skin, if your comfort zone is so tight, it's like a suit that's straitjacketing you. You
Yes.
want to be in a space where you are pushing out of that comfort zone to go through fear and learn, right? That's the framework. Leaders every year need to challenge that comfort zone from getting really tight. And they need to be able to do that with a ton of heart and like real talk with themselves. Like, what kind of leader? Who do I want to be? What's my goal here? And what do I aspire to do? Like, if this is my one life to live, how do I want to show up in it? When I think about my eulogy, what do I want people to say about me? Not what I've done, like read a resume, but really how I made people feel.
Right.
I think it's important to reset the mental model of, okay, if I were to lead more boldly, I'd be taking probably bigger risks. And it would take a ton of heart because I would have hard conversations that came from kindness, directness, but love, because I really did care about this. And I knew it was going to be tough, but I did it anyway. To me, that's a rhythm. Being empathetic and having heart as a leader innately sets you up for bold choices and bold living. And we just don't do it enough. And
No, no, you're exactly right.
I lost my mom. That set me up. I was already bold, but I had to learn, wow, everything I thought you're meant to do as a successful woman or woman of color, queer woman trying to like in the corporate ladder, that's not important anymore. It is not. And I'm not even sure why that's important. Was that important to my mom or to my nine eye? I know you're going to transition.
Uh-uh.
But is it important to me? No. After losing my mom, and seeing her journey and having my own, it's important to me to tell my story and to support other leaders and to share this like ability to transform and to live boldly and make those choices and to connect and relate in ways that have a lot of heart because we need it now more than ever. There's way too much anger. And what's at the heart of anger is pain and sadness. And we can all relate to that. We can all relate to that.
Yeah, yeah. It's just crazy the mental health issues that are going on now. I want to get into grandma because bold and heart. I mean, if you're this fierce person, but then at the same time you're running an orphanage, there's the heart and the boldness. Can
Yeah.
you go a little bit into your grandmother and what you learned from leadership and resilience from her?
I went to that amazing woman's funeral and it was hours long because so many people went to it. And I didn't know her world enough because I was always visiting or spending like chunks of time in Taipei. And she was just like, I guess, focused more on us, right? Her family who was visiting. But her world and her impact, she wasn't setting out to be like, I want people to come to my funeral and talk about me. And, I really don't believe that that's what she was going for. But to have adults come one by one yelling "Ma" to my grandmother's dead corpse, like right there, because that's, where she was. Because to them, that was their mother in the orphanage. Not like this teacher, not this like other person, not, anybody who might have adopted them. It was my grandmother. And what was fascinating to me, what I learned about that is, my nine eye was really proud. She had a ton of ego and she also had a lot of pain. And she chose to be a certain way in the world that was very commanding. She was a magnetic force. And in part, I think that was the beauty of who she was.
Uh,
But I also think it was a survival of who she believed she had to be, given all the things that she had gone through in life. And it was both wonderful, but also taught me that, my mom was telling me several years ago, it's in the book, that we're a generation of warrior spirits. And there's a lot of different examples of what warrior means. And, I had a great grandmother just like unbinding her feet, riding horses and shooting the revolution. You're like, badass warrior. But then you have my mom, who's a tech pioneer, who is a badass warrior, who's so broken also. And so to me, I learned you can be a warrior, but that doesn't mean strong. And so where am I in all this? Okay, well, to me, being a warrior means having the most heart and the most kindness without negotiating or losing myself in that. I'm not giving away my soul freely here, but I'm anchored in a drive for my soul that chooses and desires to connect with other souls because we have on this world a physical experience that's happening, but I believe something in our spirit, our souls, our connected universe, there's something that we're like driving towards as a people. And I want us to be able to achieve that. And I don't think we're being set up right now to do that. But if we miss out on the opportunity to connect in that way, I think it actually harms the possibility in the future of what our spirits go on to experience. And I think we have an opportunity here. as a humans having a physical experience, souls having a physical experience, to do right to whatever the other dimension is.
Yeah,
And I say that because that might be a second book that I'm thinking about reading.
that's a great book because it's the collective consciousness that we're all a part of. We're all humans. We just are. I was in the Jean Moreau Museum in Barcelona a couple months ago, and absolutely beautiful. And he's like a spiritual painter, back in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And he one of the things that he was talking about is like we're just all different paint, but the canvas we make up the painting, but the art is made from, you wouldn't want, I mean, I've seen some beautiful artwork where it's just one color or whatever, but most paintings there's different expressions on each of the, and that's kind of like collective consciousness is that canvas, and we all as humans, bring different flavors and everything else. And speaking of that, I want to get into you being a bilingual child, because this is really big right now in organizations where we're hiring, worldwide. And, you were misunderstood. There was even like language skill, a disability because you were speaking Mandarin and English. Can you kind of go into that a little bit? And then also as leaders, how can we work, with that? Like, because I've heard people make jokes of it, or I've heard other people make jokes of their language. Or if it's a safe place, there's kind of jokes be made. But then as a leader, how do how to handle that? Because what you don't want to have happen is what happened to you.
Okay, so
That makes
voice, it does. If voice is a muscle, language is the instrument.
Mm.
So if we want to only play one instrument, and I'm saying this as a multi-musician, I've played a lot of
Yeah, rock
instruments in my
star.
day,
Yeah.
right? So like a whole other life vignette. But I was never satisfied at playing like one instrument. And I was never good at all those instruments, but it was really fun to try out. Oh, I love the bass and the synth, and guitar is, not my favorite, but okay. I can get by and playing some cool riffs, and vocals are a whole other thing. I think if you want to use and exercise your voice as a muscle, having more than one instrument in language is very important, because what happens is if somebody's, say, on stage, let's go with like a guitarist, and like, oh yeah, I'm so good at this one instrument. It's like, okay, well, you also fall into a rut, and suddenly it doesn't feel comfortable because you don't have a variation to enjoy play. When you only know one, you're only an expert supposedly at one. And the moments you make mistakes feel really terrible. You're suddenly putting yourself on this singular pedestal that no one else might be, but maybe that like is how you perceive it. Where having a lot of different instruments and being able to expand connects you differently. Like, gosh, I wish I was completely fluent in Mandarin. I wish I was literate in Mandarin. I wish I was that in many different languages. Spanish for sure. Like, oh my gosh, I spoke French for a little while and lost it. And I think that's the amazing limitation of the human brain is so many of us, if you don't practice, kind of like an
Right.
instrument, those languages and connect with people using those languages and learn when you're not saying something right, and how language so quickly adapts and changes, we're missing out. And I want to be able to go to Spain and really connect with people who live in Spain.
Yes.
And I don't speak Spanish. And I think it's a limitation, and I would like to get better at that.
Yeah, hopefully with AI that'll we'll just be talking and then everybody will be hearing, in their language. But I do think it's really important because in boardrooms you'll see it. Maybe you have a CFO from, a different country and English is second language and begins to speak on a report, and next thing you know, the whole room's tuned out.
Mhm.
So, and I've seen it over and over and over again, and whether it's a deep accent or whatever it may be. And, how being present and paying attention, most leaders aren't doing that. They're just running, they got 50 tabs open on their Chrome,
Yeah, I know.
in their head. So just practicing being present alone and then listening to value them, and then looking at them. When you were little, did you have issues with that in both countries or just I'm here in the United States?
Taiwan is so forgiving when there's a limitation in language. They're just like applauding you that you're trying. Like, how wonderful that you're trying to speak Mandarin, but I really don't understand the rest that you're saying. Could you do other forms of like sign language or try to help me understand? And they
Right.
stop like what they're doing and try to understand. So that's very different from America. and English predominant speaking. It's like, if you don't know and you don't speak the way I like and the tone I like, with the accent that, registers you to this certain place, which then gives you an affiliation immediately, go back to the neuroscience. And it's like, okay, so maybe you're of a wealthier class or a lower class. Like all these assumptions come into that, right? With accents and place and life. Oof. I think what I've learned having a mom who, again, was a tech pioneer and did really well in the corporate America space for that time in history, she had an accent and it very much outed her as other. It was very uncomfortable that it would be brought up to her. She'd want me to speak English. She'd want me to explain. And I'm like, Mom, you know two languages fully. Like, writing and you're literate and like you can navigate this back and forth. She used to do like active live translations. Like somebody would speak in Mandarin, she would immediately just speak and explain. And like she would do that for an hour going back and forth. It's incredible. I don't know anybody who's that good at that in my entire world right now, like in my small world. So she's so just incredibly gifted in that way. And she had to be. But when I think about language and that, like her being in front of a room like the CFO that you were talking about and sharing things and people tuning her out. They're tuning her out now doubly because she's also a woman. So what I try to
Yes.
get male leaders is to tune up women's voices because they're so often tuned down. And when there are people who have different accents, to really lean in and to say, I think I missed something that you're saying that was really important and I really don't want to miss it. Could you please say that again?
Yeah.
It's your own limitation, not theirs, that you're asking for permission to understand better.
Yeah, and I think there's always the alpha in the room too, and then everybody's watching them, and then they're just queuing off of that. As far as like, so if you are the CEO or whatever, if you make sure you put, like you said, those are great. And I think it's really important too to understand what happens to you when you go on vacation to a different country. That's what they're experiencing every day in the workplace.
That's right.
So put yourself in those shoes. I was just in Paris and I was like, holy shit. Like, I mean, a little bit, you could probably get by in
A little
Paris,
bit, yeah. But
but I was like just lost. So it was great and it was fun and people are so nice and so kind all over the world. But still, I want to kind of I want to get into a little bit, not your mother's death so much, the aspect of the Phoenix. Cause I think people don't like your grandmother alchemized her hurt and then took it. She was a master alchemist, and then took it to, this next level where hours and hours of people were telling how much they loved her as a mother. With the Phoenix, how did you take that same energy that your grandmother had and alchemize, your work or alchemize yourself from your mother's loss?
love that question. And that's the last chapter of the book is titled Phoenix for listeners and watchers. I realized in kind of going back into the story of my mother and our mother-daughter journey and having a very specific perspective on my mom and being probably kind of tough on her, like be stronger and don't care what people think and accept us for who we are and you should be fine with it. And, what's up with like all these other belief systems that are hard to understand. I think what's amazing is my mom rising like a phoenix and me sensing that. I'd never pictured her as that. But the morning after her memorial, that sensation was so strong that it felt like actually it was always my mom who was the supreme warrior badass of her lineage. I could go on and on as to why I came to that conclusion. But I'm following the sensations that I had. And then when I went and wrote this story, it was like crystallizing this version of my mother who I was a bit blind to see.
That makes sense. Yes.
And then that gave me this incredible permission to let go not of only the potential boxes that I was trying to put on her, but also myself that I thought she was putting on me and that innately I was maybe trying to like sort of rub shoulders with. And now I'm just like, whoa, that's all probably bullshit. And what's real is this.
Mm.
Our lives, her life was a story I wish she wrote. I got to write part of it through my lens. And ultimately, my mom led her life as if it was worth reading. And I think that we all have the opportunity to live our lives that way because it is. Every life is worth living. and I want to read everyone's life, which is a story. So yeah, the Phoenix is very powerful, but it absolutely is my mom. Ultimately, she's the one. She's the one who kind of broke free from some deep ancestral bullshit and also connected with me as somebody who would continue to do that in a way that honored women in our history that are profound, but in a way that has a lot more heart and letting go and forgiveness, because forgiveness is incredibly powerful and freeing.
That's so good. Yeah. I want to get into, taking the courage as being a mixed race woman, professional path that you've gone, the leadership that you've gone through. And I know you've, had leadership roles at Gap and Meta and coaching on inclusion. And we'll put all that in the website, in the show notes below
Thanks.
your website. And this is amazing. Thank you for having
Thank you.
such an amazing podcast. But, I know you poured your heart into the memoir. I know there's a lot of vulnerability in it, and a lot of people don't even want to like go in that direction. Was it that moment when you decided like, and I'm going to use, pardon my French, but like, fuck it, I'm going to live boldly and be authentic? Or were you already on that path, seeing all the things that you had to experience as a leader?
Honestly, I feel like there's always been this like ballsy, fast, but also sensitive part of me that was like
Uh-huh.
kind of figuring things out quietly, but then, turning the amp on 10 kind of thing.
Yes.
But for sure, when my mom died, I mean, the grief was just like incredibly off the charts. It was just shocking what literal the moment of death and no longer having this person was just like tremendous. It was like a tremor rippling. And I describe it in the Phoenix, that chapter. It was only 4 months after her death when I made the decision to write this book. I had sort of had some ideas, but it wasn't like, no, I need to write a story also about my mom. And it has to be also about growing up and missing out on some of these opportunities to connect. What was that? Why were there so many fissures? Why didn't we talk about her immigrant experience? Like, there was just so much that I wanted to, if I had the opportunity to co-write with her, but yet
Mhm.
she was no longer available to co-author this book. And this was a book I would want her to read and for her to be like, no way you went through that. Because that was what was happening towards the end in our dialogue. And I think we experience so much silently and we forget that there are so many questions we could be asking our family to validate, to help us remember, to clarify, to know, like, is this mine or is this actually, did I inherit this from you? Like, I'm just curious. It just feels so big and like historical. Like, I can't have just created this in my one lifetime.
Mhm.
Those are so important. So I think the courage to lay bare because she didn't get a chance to, and we have one life to live. And my gosh, if this book helps somebody have, and I'm already seeing it, connect differently with a best friend. I was just on a call this morning and they're like, oh, I just reconnected with a friend. We've been friends for 54 years. And they had never talked to me about their multicultural experience. And after reading your book as a white woman, I called her up and asked her about it, and we both had this, like, deep conversation that we had never had and cried. And the person on the other call was like, "Hey, this is so much. I think I need a moment to process it." And that is both powerful and sad because you realize that years and years and years of a life inside silence really has been needed to be scripted and shared. Because look at the connection it can afford.
Mhm.
That's why I think the courage is just that.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Everybody sun shining on morning snow. It's a leadership book. To me, it's a leadership
It
book
is.
because if it, there it is right there. Because if you want to practice being bold and authentic, try it with your family first. They are a
Good
little
one,
bit more
Jason.
forgiving.
Sometimes.
So, yeah, sometimes, yeah, we'll see about that. Well, thank you, Ingrid. I appreciate it. Like I said, we'll have everything in the show notes below. It was amazing.
Thanks, Jason. What an honor.